What we're going to do is this last session, another fire hydrant coming at you, talking about leading strong. And just to, I ended, Dave Page is going to come out in just a minute and teach this with me. We want to just kind of give you some leadership gold. But I want to give you one tool right now that I teach in our coaching networks for a next level. And I talked about feedback. And this is a little tool that I have a mentor in my life by the name of Tom Patterson. Tom is, I think, 86 years old right now, and he's in failing health, and he lives in Fort Collins, Colorado. But you probably don't know that name, but you would know the name Peter Drucker, father of modern management. Well, Tom Patterson was Peter Drucker's business partner for 30 years, and he invited, I think, 10 to 12 national Christian leaders into his home and trained us in strategic planning. And one of the things he said to me, he said, Ron, he said, I've given my life to the corporations of America, because if you name a corporation, a major corporation in America, and Tom Patterson had done the strategic plan for that. He's kind of like Forrest Gump. He's been everywhere in history. He just, if you've used an ATM, Tom Patterson was on the team that invented the ATM. He was on the team that invented the first video camera. His dad was also an inventor, and his dad was friends with Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison was over at his house as a kid, and I can go on and on about Tom's stories. I love Tom Patterson. And he looked at me that day across the table and he said, Ron, I've given my life to the corporations of America. And I realized that corporations won't change the world, but the church will. And so he trained myself and a handful of others in strategic planning for ministries and what that looks like. And it's basically a toolbox of tools to help the church think strategically. I want to give you one that, again, we go through about 5 or 6 of them in Coaching Network, but I want to give you one that you could use today.
Okay,
you could use it in every meeting that you go into. And it's called the 4 Helpful Lists. And there have been different varieties of it out there, but Tom put this one together. And basically, you go into a meeting and you ask the 4 questions. You take a giant Post-it note and you say, what's right? Second question, what's wrong? The third, I think it's there you know it's right, wrong, confusing. And then what's missing? And then in the meetings, this is where you start, because when you look at those 4 questions and you get a group of people together, whether it's your staff team or your launch team or whatever it is, in any meeting, and you say, those 4 questions, which ones are people going to pile on first? What's right, what's wrong, what's confusing, what's missing? What are they going to tell you? What's wrong? That's natural, right? Let me tell you what's wrong. Every leader in here going, I'm going to tell you what's wrong. Don't let them. The power of the pen. You stand up front and you take a giant Post-it note and you go, no, we're going to start with what's right. Give me some things that are right, and just say, let's get some wins under our belt, because there's every organization, every team, there's some things that are right. So you just say, what's right? And you stand up and they give you, the feedback. Say you're doing this on your first preview service and you get your team together and say, what was right? What did we do right? Man, well, the greeting, we got that down. Okay, greeting. And you write that up, greeting. What else? What else? What else? And you get another one, and you just start listing them. And after you got about 5 or 6 rights under your belt, you'll find out that people start weighing in, and it impacts them. You say, okay, that's good. What about any of the other categories? Anything wrong or confusing or missing? And then just let them. You don't have to go in order. You just let it kind of be organic, and you just listen, and you just write it. And you collect that. And what you're going to see in this one tool is there's a last column over here that Tom calls core issues. And you say, after you've listed, like 10 or 12 things in each column, and I want to tell you what, the discussion around this, you want to change a meeting, it just elevates everything. It just brings it. I've taught this to guys in coaching networks through the years, and they all say the same thing. Man, we did this with our elders, we did this in our deacons meeting, or we did this with our council, and man, the discussion was off the chart. Why? Because they're weighing in, they're adding value, and then once you finish it, you're going to see a common thread through it. It might be, you know what? We've got some leadership stuff. Maybe there's some things that are wrong and missing, and what I'll do is I'll take a red pen then and I'll just kind of highlight some of the key issues, and I'll say core issue, leadership, or a core issue might be money. Whatever it is, you're going to find the common thread, and you've got all this discussion, and now you've got like 3 or 4 core issues that you can go after as a result of it. Now, let me tell you what some of you are thinking right now. Some of you are sitting there going, that's no big deal. That's really not that big a deal. I'm going to tell you, the first time you use this tool, you're going to know what a big deal it is. And I challenge you to do it, and it will elevate. And you talk about feedback, you're going to get it, and you're on your way to taking some leadership steps. Dave Page, up. Everybody give Dave a welcome. Let's get it.
Thanks, guys.
Dave.
I think with this, just that whole culture of feedback, when you do this, and we teach this to our church planners, the room comes alive. When they do it with people, they go back then and teach it to their people, their staff, their key volunteers, and it just comes alive, and then it passes down through your organization, through your church. So then the children's person's doing it with the children's teachers, your youth guy's doing it with the youth, and that it just goes throughout the whole organization. That's the neat thing about it.
But when we're talking about leading strong, I mean, one of the things that I know that Rick Warren taught both of us, that first one that's in the notes, which is we got to develop an unshakable conviction about growth.
Yeah.
That healthy things grow, and that we always ask the question is why am I not growing, or why isn't this working? Wrong question. The right question is, what's keeping me? What's keeping us from growing? Yeah. And you've got to have this unshakable conviction that it's true about growth in your church.
And I think when I talk with most pastors, they want to grow. It's very rare you meet a pastor and staff people whose church really don't want to grow. I guess there's some out there, but most people want to grow. They want to see their church grow. They want to see people reach for Jesus. But many of them are not willing to pay the price that it takes to grow. And I think the price, Ron, is for the pastor himself to grow, to be ruthless about whatever it's going to take to go to that next level, that he's intentional about growth in his own life, because the church can't grow anywhere above the pastor. The pastor's always got to stay ahead of the church.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we've talked this, Dave and I do coaching networks together, and we've taught it through the years. Somebody, there was one time I was out of Saddleback, and I was talking to one of the pastors there, and I said, man, I'm just, struggling with the growth of the Springs right now and trying to manage and figure out what's next and how to handle it. And he gave me this illustration. He said, Ron, if your church is growing like this, as a leader, you need to be growing like this. Because if you don't, this will bury you. And so, what Dave's talking about, we've got to be, this is the leadership growth that has to take place. We have to be growing. That's why we always talk about, what are you reading? What's your time with God like? Are you in the Word? Because are you growing as a leader? Because if you don't, if you're just kind of driving it, your growth is going to bury you. And so, you've got to ask those questions as a leader. Am I growing?
And Ron, YBH, that's great, but how do you do it? And I think that as a pastor, we can get so caught up in the now. we've got that Sunday coming. It's always coming, like Matt talked about. You're being creative, and you're so caught up in that you miss the next. You miss the future. Where are we going 3 months from now? Where are we going a year from now? And so I think that but how comes down to you've got to be willing to leave the ministry so that you can lead the mission. And get away and really look at it and look into the future and really assess that. And I found for myself, I can't do that right at the office. That's really hard. I've got to get away. I've got to get away in another location, maybe with the team, and get away from that environment to do that.
Yeah. And it's that, the second thing in your notes there is that you've got to begin to change the primary role of the pastor from minister to leader. And that's a hard one, isn't it? For most pastors, I know this is the real stumbling block.
It's huge because you're conditioned that way from whether you go to a Bible college or a seminary. They're training you how to be a pastor, not a leader. And so you've got to get training on your own sometimes, not what they taught you in seminary. I thank God for my seminary education, but I learned to be a leader after seminary. And how can they do that? How can they increase their leadership capacity?
I was going to ask you, because I know you talk about Ken Blanchard, right? What do you do?
Yes.
What's it look like?
I try and find people I admire who are ahead of me, and I'll try and befriend them. And most guys, if you call Ron up or you email him, if you get a hold of him, if you go through his secretary, and you say, hey, I'm going to be in Ocala, I'd like to have lunch. He may do that. A lot of guys will do that. You want somebody who's just maybe a little bit ahead of you are. So if you're at a church of 150, you're looking for a guy who's pastoring a church of maybe 350 or 500. If you're at 500, maybe 750 or 1,000. And you get to know that person, and then you not only network with him and find out what he's doing and what God's blessing, but also with their staff. And so we would take our staff to go visit other staffs. Didn't you do that?
Yeah, yep. Still do.
And other staffs would then come in and visit us as our church grew. And so when I planted a church, I just looked at it as I didn't know what I was doing. And so I wanted to find somebody who'd done it. Not somebody who'd just done it and grown to a couple hundred or reached, just a few people, but somebody who'd really made an impact, reached a lot of people for Christ. And so I heard about this guy named Rick Warren. And he hadn't written his books yet. A lot of people hadn't heard about him at that time. And I just thought, wow, I'd like to get to know him. And I met him at an evangelism conference, and I just said, hey, God's leading us to plant a church. We talked, and the next thing I knew, he was inviting me. He's saying he may sponsor us. And through that process, I got to know Rick, and that began this incredible journey. I met you through that whole process. And then later on, I got to a point where I wanted to go to another level, and I said, who can I find? Who's out there that's really a leadership guru that I can learn with, that I have similar values to? And I found Ken Blanchard. And I decided to do an MBA in leadership. And there were only 2 programs in the whole country that offered an MBA in the specific field of leadership. And that was the Claremont Graduate School with Peter Drucker and Grand Canyon University with Ken Blanchard. Well, Drucker died a couple years ago, so I figured, Blanchard would be the way to go. He was still alive and doing great and had received the Lord fairly recently, and so I went with that and went through that, and that really was a great thing. That helped me go kind of to the next level of my own leadership. So I tell guys, you got to be intentional. Nobody can do that for you. You've got to take the reins and develop a leadership growth plan for yourself, and that will rub off on others.